The air smells wrong. That is the first thing you notice, not smoke, not fire, not anything you have a name for. Just a wrongness in the air that settles at the back of your throat, like copper and cold ash, something your body recognizes before your mind does. It is April 26, 1986, and you are standing inside the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Soviet Ukraine. And somewhere beneath your feet, something has just gone catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. You know this building. You have walked these corridors hundreds of times. You know the sound this plant makes when it is running correctly, a low, steady hum that you stopped hearing consciously months ago because it became as natural as your own heartbeat, but tonight that hum is gone. In its place is something between silence and chaos, a building that seems to be holding its breath and screaming at the same time, and you are standing in the middle of it at exactly 1:23 in the morning. What just happened is something that Soviet nuclear engineers had declared impossible. The safety test being conducted on reactor number 4 that night triggered a power surge so violent, so sudden, and so completely beyond the design limits of the RBMK-1000 reactor that 2 successive explosions tore the Matas-ton reactor lid straight off its housing and blew the roof of the building apart. The first explosion was a steam explosion. The second, which followed less than 3 seconds later, is still debated by scientists today, with many concluding it was a prompt criticality event, a brief and catastrophic nuclear chain reaction unleashed without containment into the open air. What you just felt was not a gas leak. What you just felt was the beginning of the worst nuclear disaster in human history. If this video already has you hooked, imagine what it feels like to never miss another one. Subscribe to Lost in History, turn on notifications, and leave a like. A channel that builds stories like this one deserves a place in your life. You already know it does. The radiation at the core at this moment is being released at levels that no standard dosimeter carried by plant. Workers can even measure. The instruments many workers and first responders carry that night have a maximum reading of 3.6 Röntgen per hour. The actual levels in some areas near the open reactor will later be measured at over 30,000 Röntgen per hour. That number is not a misprint. A dose of 500 Röntgen is enough to kill a human being within days. The exposure some individuals received in the first hours of that night was equivalent to years of accumulated lethal radiation delivered in minutes. The dosimeters were not broken. They were simply not built for what had just happened, and the people carrying them had no way of knowing that the small, steady needle on their instruments was lying. You are making a decision right now. Every person inside that plant in the first minutes after the explosion is making a decision, even if they do not realize it. Some will try to approach the reactor to assess the damage. Some will go toward the sound of the explosion. Some will stop and help the people around them who are already on the ground, and some will run. Every single one of those choices will carry consequences that play out over hours, days, and years. The ones who move toward the reactor building are walking into a field of radiation so intense it will begin to kill them before sunrise. And not one of them knows that yet. Here is what you are feeling physically in these first minutes if you are anywhere near the core or the graphite debris field outside. A strange warmth on your skin that has nothing to do with ambient temperature. A metallic taste that will not go away no matter how many times you swallow. And within the first 30 minutes, if your exposure is significant, you will begin to feel a nausea so sudden and so total that it stops you where you stand. These are the first signs of acute radiation syndrome, and at Chernobyl, they appeared in the most severely exposed victims before dawn. Some workers vomited repeatedly within the first hour. Some described feeling a heat on the surface of their skin, a sunburn sensation with no sun behind it. Several of them would describe this sensation later, from hospital beds, with quiet and careful words, as if they were still trying to make sense of something that refused to make sense. Before we go further into what the next hours hold, there is a question we want to ask you, something genuinely worth stopping to think about. If you had been one of the first responders called to Chernobyl that night, a firefighter arriving with no protective equipment and no accurate information about what had actually happened, would you have gone in? The firefighters who arrived in those first hours had been told there was a roof fire. A roof fire. They climbed onto the burning reactor building with standard gear. No dosimeters capable of reading the actual radiation levels. And they began trying to put out what they believed was a conventional structural fire. Knowing what you know now, knowing what they did not know then, what would you have done in their position? Leave your answer in the comments. That question has no clean answer, and we genuinely want to hear what you think. The firefighters who responded to the initial alarm that night were from the Chernobyl plant's own fire brigade, led by Major Leonid Telyatnikov, and from the Pripyat City Fire Station. They arrived within minutes. They were not told about radiation. They were told about the fire. They did their jobs with extraordinary courage and almost no information. And within hours, many of them were in the grip of a sickness they could not explain. Their skin began to tan without sunlight. Their hair began to fall out. Their hands began to swell. Some of them could not stop vomiting. And still, several of them refused to leave their positions. 28 of the first responders and plant workers died within the following months from acute radiation syndrome. Their names are carved on a memorial in Chernobyl today. They went toward the fire when they had every human reason to go the other way. And the fire they were walking into was one that no amount of water could extinguish. You are still moving through the plant. Your choices are narrowing with every step you take, though you cannot feel that narrowing yet. The building itself is structurally compromised. Sections of the roof have collapsed. There are fires in multiple locations, some of them burning the bitumen roofing material that covers parts of the complex. There are people on the ground who are not moving. There are others moving very fast in the wrong direction toward the reactor hall because they believe someone is still alive in there. The gravity of the situation is not yet visible to you because radiation is invisible. It leaves no mark on the air. It makes no sound. It is the most honest and most deceptive killer in the world because it tells you nothing while it is doing everything to you. What you can see, however, if you move toward the western side of the building and look out toward where Reactor 4 used to be enclosed, is a column of light. Not smoke, not fire alone, light. A blue and violet glow rising from the open core into the night sky above Ukraine. What you are looking at is Cherenkov radiation, the visible emission of energy from ionizing radiation passing through air at near the speed of light. It is genuinely one of the most visually extraordinary phenomena in nuclear physics. And it is also a sign that you are looking directly at an unshielded, partially destroyed reactor core, radiating freely into the open atmosphere. The beauty of it is the most dangerous thing about it. It is the kind of sight that makes you stop. And stopping is something you cannot afford to do tonight. The Soviet government's initial response to the disaster was shaped by a system that rewarded the concealing of problems over the honest reporting of them. In the first hours after the explosion, the plant director Viktor Bryukhanov sent a report to Moscow stating that the radiation level at the site was 3.6 Roentgen per hour, the maximum reading of the available dosimeters. He either did not know or chose not to report that this reading was catastrophically incomplete. The Politburo in Moscow was not fully informed of the true scale of the disaster until days later. The city of Pripyat, a purpose-built Soviet city of approximately 50,000 people located just 3 kilometers from the reactor, was not evacuated until 36 hours after the explosion. For a day and a half, people in Pripyat woke up, went to work, sent their children to school, opened their windows in the spring warmth, and breathed radioactive air without any warning whatsoever. Think about what that means for the world outside this plant tonight. The roads around Chernobyl are not sealed off. There are no barricades yet. There are no radiation monitoring checkpoints. People are driving through areas where the graphite debris field, pieces of the actual reactor core, have been scattered across roads and open ground. Some of these fragments are so intensely radioactive that standing near one for a matter of minutes delivers a potentially lethal dose. And yet traffic moves. People walk. Children sleep with their windows open in the mild spring night, and nobody is coming to warn them, because the system has not yet decided how to tell them the truth. The evacuation of Pripyat, when it finally came on the afternoon of April 27th, was conducted with a combination of genuine logistical effort and deliberate deception. Residents were told they would be gone for 3 days. They were told to leave their pets because the animals would be allowed back in 3 days. They left their photo albums. They left their money. They left their furniture and their food and their clothing because they would be back in 3 days. They were never allowed to return. The city of Pripyat has been empty ever since, and today it stands as one of the most quietly devastating places on the surface of this earth. A city preserved mid-sentence, mid-life, mid-everything, with a fairground Ferris wheel that was supposed to open for May Day celebrations 4 days after the explosion, and never did. You have now been inside this plant for what feels like an hour but may have been less. Time is not moving the way it normally does tonight. Your body is beginning to report things to you that you are trying not to interpret. A heaviness in your limbs, a warmth behind your eyes, a nausea that comes and goes in slow waves. Or perhaps you are simply afraid and exhausted and breathing too fast. That is the terrible ambiguity of the first hours of radiation exposure. The early symptoms overlap almost completely with the symptoms of extreme fear and physical stress. Your body is telling you something is wrong, but it cannot tell you which kind of wrong. And in 1986, in that building, in those corridors, there is no one who can tell you either. The plant has more to show you before you reach the exit. In the hours following the explosion, one of the gravest concerns among the engineers and scientists who were beginning to understand what had happened was the possibility of a second, far larger catastrophe. The molten reactor core, now sitting in a mass of burning graphite and melted nuclear fuel, was in danger of burning through the concrete floor of the reactor building and reaching the water-filled bubbler pools beneath. If the corium, the molten nuclear material, contacted those water pools, the resulting steam explosion had the potential to be catastrophic enough to destroy the remaining 3 reactors at the Chernobyl plant and spread contamination across a vastly larger area of Europe. 3 plant workers named Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bespalov, and Boris Baranov voluntarily waded through radioactive water in the flooded basement corridors of the plant to manually open the valves that would drain those pools. They survived. All 3 of them survived, which is a fact that history sometimes forgets because the story is so often told as if it ended differently, and that oversight is its own kind of injustice to men who walked into water that should have killed them and walked back out. There is another danger that will persist for days after the explosion, one that the entire world will come to watch with a specific and helpless dread. The burning graphite in the reactor core, exposed to open air, is sustaining a fire that cannot be extinguished with water. Water on a graphite fire can accelerate the spread of radioactive contamination by creating radioactive steam that rises and disperses into the upper atmosphere. The solution that Soviet authorities employed was to drop sand, boron, clay, and lead from military helicopters flying directly over the open reactor. The pilots of those missions flew their passes knowing that each one was exposing them to radiation levels that would shorten their lives by an unknowable amount. They flew anyway. Between April 27 and May 10th, approximately 5,000 metric tons of material was dropped onto the reactor from the air, each drop made by a pilot who looked down into an open, glowing wound in the earth and did his job regardless. You are outside now. You made it out of the building. The air out here is not safe either, but it moves. and moving air feels like something a living person should be breathing. The sky above you is beginning to lighten at its eastern edge because it is nearly 4 in the morning, and April comes early in Ukraine, and the dawn does not wait for disasters to resolve themselves. Around you, there are people sitting on the ground and people walking fast, and a few vehicles moving with their headlights cutting through the thin, strange haze. Nobody is panicking in the dramatic sense. That is one of the things the survivors consistently described afterward. There was no screaming crowd, no mass hysteria. There was instead a kind of quiet, purposeful movement shaped by confusion and professional training, and the very human tendency to believe that if you just keep doing something, things will eventually make sense. The people around you are moving. You are moving. And above the tree line to the north, there is still that impossible, eerily beautiful blue glow painting the sky above the ruin of Reactor 4. What you are carrying with you as you walk away from Chernobyl tonight is not just the experience of surviving a disaster. It is the weight of a lesson that humanity has still not finished learning. The engineers who designed the RBMK reactor knew about a specific design flaw that made the reactor unstable at low power levels. That knowledge existed inside documents, inside institutions, inside a system that had no mechanism for converting known danger into preventive action. The test being conducted the night of April 25th and 26th was supposed to improve reactor safety. The conditions under which the test was ultimately run, after a delay of nearly 10 hours during which the reactor was held in a low-power state that worsened its instability, were the conditions that made the catastrophe not just possible, but essentially inevitable. There is a word that kept appearing in the accounts of Chernobyl survivors, investigators, and scientists in the years that followed. The word is normalization, the normalization of risk. The slow process by which a known danger, repeated often enough without immediate consequence, stops feeling dangerous. The operators who were at the controls of reactor number 4 that night were not reckless people. They were trained, experienced professionals operating inside a system that had gradually made certain shortcuts feel like routine. The safety systems that were disabled during the test had been disabled during previous tests. The parameters that were outside the approved range that night had been outside approved ranges before. Nothing bad had happened before, and so the danger had been normalized. And then something happened that could not be normalized, and 50,000 people lost their city, and hundreds of thousands lost their health, and the entire relationship between humanity and nuclear energy shifted in ways that are still being reckoned with today. The human scale of the Chernobyl disaster cannot be fully captured by any single statistic. The immediate death toll of 31 people, the figure most often cited by official reports, covers only those who died directly from the explosion and from acute radiation syndrome in the months immediately following. The long-term consequences, the thyroid cancers, the elevated leukemia rates, the generational effects on communities across Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia remain a subject of ongoing scientific and political debate. What is beyond dispute is that the disaster forced the permanent displacement of approximately 350,000 people and contaminated more than 100,000 square kilometers of land. The liquidators, the workers who were sent in to clean up and contain the disaster in the months and years following, eventually numbered over 600,000 people. Many were given inadequate protection. Many were never fully told what they were being exposed to. Many of them spent the years that followed in a fog of illness and uncertainty that their governments were slow to acknowledge. The exclusion zone that surrounds the Chernobyl site today covers approximately 2,600 square kilometers. Within it, something unexpected has happened. Without human activity, the forests have grown back. Wildlife populations of wolves, lynx, wild boar, brown bears, and Przewalski's horses have established themselves in numbers that are remarkable given the radiation levels still present in the soil. Nature, it turns out, is more resilient in the face of radiation than it is in the face of sustained human activity. That is not a comfortable thought, but it is a true one. And Chernobyl keeps offering truths that are difficult to sit with. The new containment structure built over the original sarcophagus, completed in 2016 and known as the new safe confinement, is the largest movable land-based structure ever built by human hands. It measures 257 meters wide, 162 meters long, and 108 meters tall, and it was slid into position over the damaged reactor on rails, because it was too large and too heavy to be lifted. It is designed to contain the radioactive materials beneath it for at least 100 years, while decommissioning work is conducted inside. It is, in a very real sense, a monument to consequence. A structure built not to celebrate what humanity achieved, but to manage what humanity broke. You survived this night, not because you were braver than the people who did not because you made better decisions. You survived because of where you happened to be standing at 1:23 in the morning, and because of the thickness of the concrete between you and the core, and because of the particular path your feet chose in those first confused minutes. The firefighters who did not survive were not weaker than you. The plant workers who absorbed fatal doses in the first hour were not less deserving of survival. Chernobyl did not select its victims by the content of their character. It selected them by their coordinates on a map. Lost in history will keep bringing you inside the moments that change the world, not to frighten you and not to make suffering into spectacle, but because the only honest way to understand what happened in these places is to stand inside them and feel the weight of what was at stake. Every story we tell is built on real testimony, real evidence, real science, real people who lived and did not live through things that should not have been possible. If that kind of storytelling matters to you, come back. We will be here. And the next story will be worth every second of your time.